that. All right. So, Chancey families, we have Dr. Danovich here from the University of Louisville, and she is going to share with us how to make the most of screen time.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here virtually to talk about this. So my name is Judith Danovich. I am an associate professor of psychology at the University of Louisville. I'm primarily a researcher. I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I research cognitive development and basically how kids think about information. Where do they go for information, and how do they think about information sources? And one of the things that I've gotten very interested in the last few years is especially how kids think about technology and the role that it plays in their lives and in how they think about things, but also in how they learn. And so if you could go to the next slide. So here's a quick selection of some headlines that I found in the last few days having to do with kids and screen time, right? And I'm a parent myself, and I know there's a lot of scary sort of statistics out there and a lot of fears about screen time. What's interesting is that actually over the last few years now, not including the pandemic, because that has really changed things. Kids were actually spending less time on screens, but still than they used to, like say in like the 1980s or 1990s when kids were watching TV all day. But still, according to a 2019 report from the American Academy of Pediatrics, kids ages 8 to 12 spend an average of 4.5 hours a day using screens for different kinds of purposes, and that includes TV, but also like tablets and iPads and phones and all kinds of screens. And a lot of you might have heard about how there's guidelines out there that say that children under age 2 really shouldn't do screen time at all, and even older kids really should only do about 1 or 2 hours maximum per day. And again, I realized that all of these guidelines and things were before the pandemic, and that has really changed the landscape now that kids are having to spend time on screens for school, right? So there are a lot of fears out there, and there's obvious reasons why too much screen time is obviously not a healthy thing, right? If you're spending all day in front of a screen, you're not getting any exercise, you're not engaging with other people, and that's especially an issue for young kids, not having any social interactions because they're staring at screens. But my goal today isn't really to focus on that. And again, those are sometimes pretty extreme cases. And my goal really isn't to tell families what you should or should not do. Instead, what I really want to do is give families tools to figure out what's right for them and how to judge different types of screen time activities to kind of figure out, is this a good idea for my child? And if it is, how much of it should my child really be doing? Right now their estimates are that there's like 100,000 apps labeled educational on the App Store. So, there's a lot out there for parents. And I think one of the tough things is not necessarily, saying, oh, well, we're just never going to do screens, but to choose, right? What are we going to spend time on? What is, appropriate? What is educational potentially for my child, and what maybe isn't? Maybe it's just fun. So if you could go to the next slide. So this is just some general guidelines here about, things to sort of think about as you're choosing screen time for your child. So first of all, of course, you want to decide what is and isn't okay for your family. And by the way, when I say screen time, I really mean all kinds of screen time. So this also includes TV and movies, right? That's still something that people have to think about and make decisions about. And again, for each family, the answer here might be a little different, right? So what is okay with you? What is not okay with you for your child to be watching or doing on a screen? The next piece of advice here is to research your options, to really look into things and know what your child is going to be doing before they do it. I've been in this situation where my child comes to me and says, I want to download this app. My friend told me about this. And my answer is always like, okay, give me a day or two. Let me look into it. I want to see what is this about? What kind of activity is this? Another thing is to be consistent across media, right? So if you decide that, you don't want your child, you don't feel they're ready to watch movies with a lot of like gun violence, for example. Well, then you don't want to also allow them to play video games that have that kind of first person shooters, right, or things like that, right? You want to be consistent and say like, okay, this is where our family draws the line, and we're not going to allow this in any format, not just in a movie. And then this last one is one that I think sometimes people kind of forget about, which is one major principle here of sort of thinking about screen time is to tell the other adults who are sometimes supervising your child, right? So we hear these stories about, well, at our house, you're not allowed to do this, but you go to grandma's house and she lets you watch the R-rated movies, right? And that can cause a lot of conflict, and for kids that can be a bit confusing too, right? And inconsistent in terms of like, I know mom and dad don't let me do this. Well, do I try to do it here, or so on? So again, that's another sort of thing to think about today as we're talking about these things. Is this isn't just decisions for yourself, but these are decisions that you should make the other people who spend time with your child aware of. And again, please feel free to interrupt me with any questions. So one of the things I want to really focus on today is some recent research that has actually identified characteristics of good quality screen media for kids. And by good quality, I mean educational. So a lot of parents, have rules, especially with younger kids, right? Yeah, you can do screen time, but it needs to be educational. And the tricky thing is, how do you know what makes screen time educational, or what makes it high quality for kids? And so there's 4 principles, and I'm going to show you some examples, and we're going to walk through, and I'm going to really explain these. But the 4 principles are that it be active, engaging, meaningful, and social. And so let me show you what that really looks like. And I'm going to give you examples of TV and apps for these things. I'm by no means endorsing these. I don't work for any of these companies or anything like that. I just want you all to see kind of what I'm talking about. Are you all still there? I feel like oh, okay. Sorry, I thought I might have frozen there for a moment. Let me know, Mr. Cahill, if for some reason you can't hear me anymore.
I will. I muted myself.
Okay. Sorry, it's so hard to know if everything's dropped and I'm talking to myself here. I just want to be sure. All right. So the first principle for judging screen time is to look at whether it is active. And I'll give you some examples from sort of classic TV, right? So shows like Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. One of the things that made these shows so good, and again, research shows that kids, really learn from watching these shows, is that they engage the child in thinking about things. They weren't just kind of throwing facts about things, but Mr. Rogers would say things like, "What do you think?" Or "What would you do in this situation?" Sesame Street would do things like they would, sort of set it up like, okay, now's the thing you need to pay attention to. We're going to show you, this letter. It really, what they would do and what they did so well is that they set kids up to be active learners, right? They would say, okay, here's what's coming. We're going to count to 10 next. All right, now let's do it, right? 1, 2. And that's still a valuable thing. And a lot of kids' television now, especially on stations like PBS and that are sort of aiming to be educational, do these things these days. These were the kind of pioneers. So if you could go to the next slide. The same thing is true for apps, right? So this is just an example. This is an app for pretty young kids. It's like a Lego Duplo app. And again, what the kid is doing here is manipulating things, right? They have to think about what goes together with what. The contrast here, the things that are not active are things like, if you can imagine like an app where all you did was press the button and pop a bubble, right? That's not making you think about anything, right? So what you want to be looking for is active thinking, this kind of minds on, making decisions, moving things around, not just kind of doing the same thing, pressing the button again and again, because we know that kids don't really learn from that. It might be fun to do something like, pop the bubbles. And again, there's a time, I think, for things that are just fun and don't necessarily have to be educational. But if you're looking for education, you want it to be active, sort of minds-on kinds of activities.
Dr. Danovich, would that be just like kind of summarizing with like if it gives the kid choices, thinking that is more active than just randomly doing something?
Right. So games, apps where you make choices is better than games where you're just kind of watching the things happen, or, you have to do the next thing in that order. Things where you can do things in different orders, right? So like even with these little blocks on the screen, I've never played this game, but if you imagine like, oh, well, I could put the green one first and then the yellow one, or maybe I could put them all across and then build it up, right? Even that simple. And with older kids too, some of my examples are for younger kids, but the same thing is true, right? You can really kind of see which kind of apps and games make the kid think and are kind of like, puzzles to solve, versus the ones where it's just like click, 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 right? I can see it on my child when he's, you can actually see it, right? It's just like click, 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 click. That's not active, right? All right, so the next principle is that it be engaging. At the most basic level, this means it needs to keep the child's attention. It needs to be at the right level for them. So these examples, I don't know if you all know these. The one on the left is Maisie Mouse, which is a very, very simple sort of preschooler show. It's a lovely little show. And it would keep the attention of a 3-year-old, but you put a 6-year-old in front of a Maisie Mouse and they're just gonna be like, nope, right? On the other hand, the one on the right, Peg Plus Cat, that one, if you put that in front of a 3-year-old, it's actually a little tough. And they don't always get it because it has these kind of math concepts and things that are not, accessible to them. So, you want to aim for media that is challenging, but accessible. It shouldn't be over their heads, but it also shouldn't be way under their, abilities. And really, sometimes simpler is often better. So especially when you're looking at things like apps, having too many choices, too many complicated, like you can do this and you can do this, and that's not great for kids in terms of learning. Sometimes it's better to it shouldn't be boring and it shouldn't be mindless, but it doesn't have to be super complicated either. So if you'll click to the next slide. So here's an example of an app that I really like. It's called Toka Elements, and it's really cute. So you have these little elements and you do things like you can heat them up or cool them down, and sometimes you heat them up and they get bigger, and it's very basic sort of science concepts, though it never says that, right? And the kid doesn't necessarily think of it as that. What's nice about it is it's engaging, it keeps your attention, you can try lots of different things, so it's not just like the same thing every time. You can kind of see, ooh, what happens if I combine this one and this one? So that's another nice sort of way of engagement, is these contingent interactions. Like if I do this, this might happen. If I do this, something else might happen. The other thing to really look out for with engagement is things that pop up, like ads. So, a lot of apps, especially free ones, have, you play a little and then you've got to watch this commercial. And that, just like anything else, that breaks up your attention, right? And for kids, that can be really tough. So it could be a really nice educational app, but if it's constantly interrupting what the kid is doing to be like, buy this thing or watch this commercial, be careful, because that's going to really drop their engagement and their attention and focus on it. And again, if your goal is for this to be educational, you want them to keep that attention and engagement. Let's see, go on if you could to the next one. All right, so the third one is the screen time should be meaningful to the child's life. And again, some of the best sort of TV shows for kids are the ones that, they might have fictional characters, and, they might be kind of silly, but eventually they connect to real life, right? So, Daniel Tiger, yeah, they're puppets and whatever, but, one of the things that makes it such a great show is that it's always about some real thing, like, what to do when your parents leave you with a babysitter, or trying new foods, or things like that.
Kind of
So
like
looking
life lessons.
yeah, exactly. And so, even with things like very basic educational sorts of things, you want to make sure it connects to real life. There's a lot of these things that are like, they're fun, but, if you're just manipulating numbers on the screen and you never connect it to like counting real things, that's not going to get you very far. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll give you some examples of some apps that do a good job of being meaningful. So this one is called, I forget what it's called, My Food Nutrition or something like that. And it's an app where there's like different little games about foods for kids. And you can see here some screenshots of it, right? So, different plates with assortment of foods. You can pick out foods that you like. So this one's easy to see why this is meaningful, right? Because kids need to eat. And we want them to make good choices. So playing this little game, is teaching them to make those good choices. If you could go to the next slide, I'll give you an example for older kids. So there's a lot of these math apps that are just like, we're going to do these, addition problems or multiplication problems. This one's a nice example, though, of being meaningful. Because in this one, you're talking about buying stuff at a store, right? And the kid can punch in. And so it's taking the math concepts and it's connecting them to real life, as opposed to just practicing drills of just numbers, right? Again, there's a time and a place for everything. Sometimes it's useful to just practice the multiplication tables. But ideally, you want it to have that application and have it be something meaningful to the child. And this is another sort of silly example, in the next slide. But this was an app my son liked when he was little. And it was very simple. It was you would put the little sushi pieces in the sushi roll, right? And then you could roll it up and the little guy would eat it. This got him interested in trying sushi when we were at a restaurant one day because he had played this little game and he was like, oh, sushi, and I'm going to go try that. So, I think the meaningfulness can come in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to just be like, oh, I'm teaching you this thing. It could just be like, this is a real thing. People eat this and maybe one day you'll like to try it. You can imagine this with like a game with a different kind of sport or something, right? It might get the child interested in actually going out and playing that sport. There's one more example here, if you'll, So this is back to that Toka Elements game, which is that sometimes the adult needs to make the connection of why it's meaningful, right? So the kid might just be playing this game, and you as the adult might then need to be like, actually, those little letters. My son thought he used to play this game and he was like, oh, that one's called C and that one's called P, right? I was like, actually, this is real. This is chemistry. And there's this thing called the periodic table, once he was old enough to understand it. And you know what? Lo and behold, that got him really interested in looking at the periodic table and getting a book from the library about chemistry. Because he had played this little game and he liked the game so much and he thought, oh, I'll make that. So again, that's a connection I had to make for him, right? On his own, I don't think he would have ever figured out this game is the periodic table, or that these are representing real things, real elements. So again, the meaningfulness can come in different ways. It's not always just a straight path of, this is exactly like real life. It might be that you make the connection for the child and say, oh, you know what? This is kind of like when we're at the grocery store and we have to figure out how much change we get back. All right, and then sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just saying, it seems like the generalization shouldn't be that stretch, because I think sometimes people think, oh, well, this does mean, something in real life, but if you have to really, really explain it,
I think, I mean, again, that might depend on the kid. I think with an older kid, you can make that connection, with a 3 or 4-year-old, it would be a hard time to explain that these are elements. And, the 3 or 4-year-old might be able to play this game, but I wouldn't try to make that connection for them, right? So, that's where you have to really think about your family, what you're doing, what your kids are interested in, and see, can I make that connection for them? let's see. Oh, and one more thing about the meaningfulness also is you want to help. Another thing that really helps is having like a plot. So as opposed to just random isolated facts, like, random multiplication table problem, it's nice when it has more of like a story or something that's behind it. That is also a way of making things meaningful. So the fourth principle is that screen time should ideally be interactive. And interactive can mean it involves other people. It's something you do with other kids or that an adult does with a child. But interactive actually can take a lot of different formats. So one of the first TV shows that really did this effectively was Dora the Explorer. And if you've ever watched that, what Dora does in the show is, she turns to the audience and says, will you help me count to 3? Or where is the, whatever hidden? And again, there's been actually a lot of research done, particularly on Dora. And that relationship, even though, of course, Dora is not a real person and the child can't really talk back to them, but kids do, right? If you've ever watched a kid watch a show like this, like they'll talk back. And that actually does really help their learning, really helps them to understand and remember the information, to have that kind of, it's not a true social interaction, but so that feel of talking to another person. And so ideally, screen time should do that. Again, it could be in TV or movies, but it can also be in apps, so there are apps, especially for younger kids with, popular characters like Elmo, and Elmo's telling you find the letter A. Don't underestimate that. There's actually some good research supporting that, that makes a difference, that the kid feels like they're interacting as opposed to just like some voice coming down, from nowhere and saying, find the letter A. So if you could go to the next slide. So there's a lot of ways to make screen time interactive. One is to actually be talking to other people, right? So, one thing that I think all families should know is activities like talking on FaceTime or Skype or Zoom. Researchers in general have been very clear on the fact that really in many ways that doesn't count as screen time. Like that is basically social interaction. Kids, they do learn from these interactions. There's been studies where, the kids are talking to someone on a computer, they learn language as long as they are engaged. It can't just be someone's just talking here in the corner and the kid is doing something else. But if the kid is looking at the screen and talking to a grandparent and it's going back and forth, that is great. That is, again, I don't count that as screen time in the sense of like something that you should limit or anything like that. There's some really great stuff out there these days where, you can read stories together with a grandparent or anybody who's on the other side of the screen. If you go to the next slide, there's also just the chance that, you can pick games and pick activities that kids can do together with siblings. So, it's interactive. If we're both watching this thing, but we're taking turns, that's interactive. It doesn't have to be kind of elaborately set up to be interactive, as long as you're turning it into an interactive activity. And again, this goes for TV and movies too, right? So one of the big principles of sort of good use of screen time for kids is to do it together with other people, right? You can really transform even a not great TV show, not very educational TV show. If families watch it together and they talk about it and you say, oh, see that thing, that's what takes even something that's not very high quality into the realm of like very positive content for kids. So, if you're looking for apps, things that have multiple users, things that let you collaborate, kids can work together or take turns, things that let you interact with other people. Obviously, other people, I don't advocate for kids being online with strangers. The next one is, a popular example, of course, like Minecraft, right? So, Minecraft actually has a lot of nice features to it. But one of the nicest things, especially during the pandemic, right, has been that kids can be on there together. They can build together. They can, it shouldn't replace real life social interaction, but it's not a bad sort of second best option, right? When you can't have that real life interaction. I can tell you my son has been playing Minecraft with kids at school, and I think that's been really nice for all of them since they haven't, until recently been able to actually see each other in person. So what I wanted to do is actually, so those are 4 principles, right? And so I wanted to walk you through 2 just examples of I've given you examples, but what I really hope that people will get out of this presentation is, when you see a new app, what are you looking for, right? Like when your kid says, can you download this for me, or can I watch this TV show? Like, what are you trying to see? So I was going to just give 2 little examples, and people can kind of tell me what they think about these apps. This is an old one. It's called Alien Assignment. It's a very cute little screen thing. So basically the way this app worked is, there's this little storyline, which is these aliens have landed and their ship is broken. And the kid is supposed to take it. It's an iPad kind of, or iPhone app. And if you'll go to the next slide. So the whole game here, it's very, very simple, is that it tells the kid to look for a certain tool that the aliens need to fix their ship. And then you have to take a photo of it with the phone or the iPad, and you show it to an adult. And so I'll show you an example if you go to the next one. So this one was like, you have to find something that you can sit on. And so the child is supposed to take it and walk around the house and, take a picture, say, of like a chair. And then you see the little thumbs up, thumbs down, and they show it to an adult, and the adult says, oh, yeah, okay, you can sit on that, and thumbs up. And like I said, it's a very, very simple game. And I think there's one more screenshot here. Oh, no, sorry. Let's stay on that one. So, and you go around, you do this a few times, and that's the whole game. It didn't really have a lot of elaborate things. So what do people think about this? How does it rank in terms of, active, engaging, meaningful, and interactive?
I think it meets most of them.
Yeah, so it's active in the sense that the kid has to go around and do stuff. And there's no one right answer, right? There's a lot of things in the house you might be able to sit on, right?
Right.
Meaningful is nice because these are things that you really do sit on a chair, like it is real life if you're walking around and finding it. Just to give you examples, some of the others were like, find something that you can turn on. So, you could take a picture of a lamp, or you could take a picture of the, light switch or something like that. It's interactive. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I skipped one. Oh, it's engaging. That's the only part here where I would say it could depend on the kid. So my son liked this when he was 6 or 7. I don't think he'd like it very much now that he's 10. It would seem a little boring to him. So that's where, the engaging, you got to really think about, well, who is this supposed to engage? And then, of course, it's meaningful. It's interactive because even though the adult isn't doing it with the child, it has this component where you have to go to an adult and you have to talk about like, oh, was this a good choice? Do you think you can sit on this or not? And I'll say this one was developed based on by educators using a federal grant. So it's not a coincidence that it hits these things, right? It was designed to do that. But let's look at one more. So in the next slide, this is, I just kind of randomly chose this one. But this is actually very typical of a lot of the apps that you see on the App Store. And this one's, again, it's meant for very young kids. And so it basically does 2 things. It's teaching you shapes, right? So, touch the triangle. And then if you get it right, you get these little stickers that pop up and the child can kind of move it around, and drag it to wherever they want it on the screen. So what do you think about this one? So again, kind of going back through the principles, is it active?
Not in the way you described that it should be.
Right. So yeah, you're doing a thing, you touch the triangle. There's not a lot else you can do here, right? It's not, there's not a lot of options there, not a lot of room for like being creative or solving it in a different way because there's only one triangle. So I would say it's not terribly active. It's going to get boring fast, and that's going to not help very much with the engagement piece either. Obviously, it's also very easy, right? So even some preschoolers would be like, "Oh, this is a little boring for me. There's only 3 things here to choose from."
Mm-hmm.
What about meaningful?
No.
So, one suggestion I would have for whoever made this app, and again, I'm not trying to criticize this particular company or anything, is, instead of having big yellow shapes, you could have had real life things that are triangles. You could have had a slice of pizza, and you could have had a box, and, things that kids would actually see in their real life. Because ultimately, we don't want kids to just be able to recognize a triangle on the screen. We want them to be able to say, oh, look, that's a triangle, right? Or, I'm making a triangle shape. So, a very simple kind of fix here for me would have been to just, instead of just plain shapes, have them actually be things, that kids actually see. That already would have made this a much better app. And of course, interactive, it's really not interactive. It's just something the kid would do by themselves. It's not really clear to me that there'd be much of like a way to, maybe you could take turns with another kid, but I don't think it would be very appealing. So again, these are the 4 principles. And my hope would be that, again, I'm sharing this as sort of like, not every app or not every TV show is going to hit all 4 things. And frankly, I think even if they hit 2 or 3, that's actually probably pretty good. But these are the things to kind of be looking out for when you're choosing what's a good sort of product or what's a good show for my child to watch. So I'll pause there in case anyone has any questions about this, and then if you want, we can go on to talk about like making a screen time plan for your family.
I really like the principle of it being meaningful. I don't think I'd thought about that enough.
Yeah, that's something that, I think across the board, that's really important, right? It's no good to be able to identify shapes or to do some kind of math problem if you can't actually apply it in the real world. And again, there's no harm in knowing that, for example, this is a triangle, like that's good. But ideally, you want it to kind of go to the next level of it should connect. And the reality is, of course, kids find it more interesting and are going to be more engaged in it if it's meaningful to them, right? If it's not just sort of abstract shapes on a screen.
And I was thinking, you brought up some things like just talking about the apps that the kids are watching or playing being more meaningful. I feel like a lot of times with my kids, especially, they're picking things that are meaningless because it's just quick and easy and it's, that instant gratification type of thing for them. So I'm going to be more mindful of making sure. In fact, like after this, I want to go look through all their apps.
Yes.
What types of apps they've downloaded and like how meaningful is it really?
Yeah, so and I'm so glad you said that also because, one thing I want to reiterate is it doesn't always have to be educational and meaningful. Sometimes it's just fun. Sure. And that is totally fine. Sometimes we just, my son really likes like Angry Birds, right? Yeah, there's really not a lot of education there. It's not really very meaningful. It has terrible like ads and stuff. But it is fun, and he has a good time. There's nothing in it that I find objectionable. Like there's nothing bad about it. It's just not educational. And so at our house, we're very clear on like you can do this, but we don't consider this educational. And if our goal is that your screen time, especially during the pandemic, we've said, yeah, you can do screen time, but we want it to be educational. We want you to be doing something that you have to actually think, about when you're doing it. And so, again, I'm not trying to say everything should be educational, but if you are looking for educational, these are the things to look for. And I think there's a lot of traps out there. There's a lot of things that claim that they're educational and they're really not, which, is really unfortunate. and again, you might be able to turn something that's not educational into educational if it's something that your family connects to, right? Like I said, like the little sushi thing, I wouldn't have really called that educational. But, we like to go out to sushi restaurants, and we were able to kind of make that connection for him. So, it turned into something a little more educational than it would have been. So let's talk for a few minutes. I don't want to run out of time about making a family screen time plan. So that's on the next slide, and I also have these questions on a handout. And this is actually what we're already talking about, right? Is one of the first things you want to decide is our goal to be educational, or is this just for fun? And if it's just for fun, that's fine, but we might want to decide, well, how much fun, right? How much time do we want to spend on screen time that is just for fun? It's kind of like people sometimes use the analogy to food, right? Like, we like to have candy and unhealthy foods, but we're not going to have that all day long. We're going to make sure that we also are eating healthy foods sometimes. So that's question one. Question two is, are there going to be times where you don't want screens on? And there's research really going back about 40 years saying that, having, for example, TV on in the background, even though the kid might not be watching the TV actively, or it might not even be a show that they find interesting, still really interferes with their attention and their learning, right? And so I think for every family, it's important to decide, what is a screen-free zone? Is it going to be the dinner table? Is it going to be, after 8 o'clock as we're getting ready for bed, and then, no more screens? There is some research suggesting, the blue light and all that stuff from the screens might disrupt sleep for kids. For older kids or teens, it might be, your phone has to be turned off from, 9 p.m. till 7 a.m., right? And these things are going to change over time. But these are the sort of things to think about. And then, of course, that kind of goes along with that is, how are you going to enforce this? What are the rules? What are the consequences going to be if you go past whatever, time limit we have, or things like that? I think another big one is to think about how much you need to monitor your child's screen time and how you're going to do it if you are. All right, so the nice thing is that technology has kind of solved this problem. So there's a lot of these nice programs you can install that either set time limits or they lock out certain websites or games, right? So there's a lot of control. One thing to think about is, as kids get older, though, is you want them to develop into adults who can handle screens. And so having, there's research coming out that says having too many controls, especially for older kids, probably isn't ideal, because what you really want them to start learning is self-control for themselves, right? So this is something we're working on at my house right now, which is, if we set a timer for 30 minutes of screen time, I could set it so that everything just shuts off and, like, I'm in control. But what we're working on, we're not quite there yet, is getting to, okay, when you hear that timer go off, you need to stop. You need to turn it off, because that's teaching the child to manage their own screen time, right? Because you want a child who's going to grow up to be an adult who can turn off their phone when they're at the important business meeting and they're not, unable to kind of get away from it, right? So that's something to think about, especially as kids are getting older, is you want to keep an eye on it. And, there's a lot of software out there to do it. But you want to be careful that at some point you do start to kind of back off and give the child a chance to monitor themselves. Question 5 is, of course, who's going to decide, right? Again, with younger kids, I think it can be pretty easy to say, well, they're not going to pick the apps. I'm going to pick the apps. Or if they want an app, I'm going to make sure I check it first. With older kids, again, this is a conversation I think you can have, which is, what is okay with us and what is not okay with us. Again, we're not okay with R-rated movies, but we're okay with a PG-13 rated movie if you're at a friend's house. And then again, just to kind of bring this back to the beginning, think about how you're going to communicate this to other adults who might offer your child screen time, right? How are you going to communicate this to friends' parents, to grandparents or cousins or whoever the child might spend time with? Because, families can have very different ideas here of what's appropriate at different ages. And I think it's a very reasonable thing to say to a family, sorry, we don't let our child watch R-rated movies yet. We don't think he's ready for that, or scary movies, right, or things like that. And the same thing is true for apps, so there's games where I've said, my child's friend has this game and we've said, no, that is not okay with us. Like we are not ready for you to be playing these kinds of video games yet. So, I think in the end, obviously families should feel empowered, right? You do your research, you have a plan, and that's going to help you to sort of navigate, a pretty complicated world where, other kids now have phones and at school there's different things and there's a lot out there. So I'll stop there. I want to make sure people have a chance to have questions. One thing I will mention, one more thing I'll mention is on that handout that hopefully you'll be receiving, I did list some websites and resources. You don't have to figure this all out on your own. There's some really great resources. So Common Sense Media, I think, is a great one. I don't actually always go and play the app. I go on Common Sense Media and I look to see what it says. And they do a great job of breaking down, like, is it age appropriate for different ages? Does it have anything that, parents might not want their kids to be seeing? The ESRB, which is, the ones that do the movie ratings and they do the video game ratings. And then I've listed in there actually a brand new article. It just came out about a week ago. It's a scientific article. It's not written for a popular audience, but they actually got the current top 124 apps labeled educational for kids, and they have scores on each of these 4 elements for each one. And the spoiler here is a lot of them score really poorly. So, a lot of the most popular, top selling apps on the App Store are really not great. There's exceptions, but a lot of them are not great. But anyway, if there's anybody listening who's interested in actually seeing specific apps, that's a really nice resource. So yes, again, questions.
Thank you, Dr. Danovich. I think you did it.
You're so welcome.
A fantastic job echoing. Is there an echo?
No.
Okay, on my end, there's an echo, so I apologize. I do have a question. I have teenagers, and at the beginning, I was really good about limiting their screen time. And like Miss Burton's kids, they're older now, and it's not out of control. I don't want to divulge too much of my poor parenting, but it's a little different these days. And whether they're on a video game, which isn't as simple as like a Minecraft app, it's a little more complicated, but it's meaningful to them in the sense that it's their socialization. And it doesn't completely take over the human interaction with other people, but it does take over. It does take over just because it's social. So they still interact with their parents and their, family members, but it takes over their socialization stuff. What is a limiting, like a time frame that they should be playing video games? Because my screen time is different. It's either video games or now their phones, or then they have multiple devices.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious how much
time they should be.
Yeah. It's almost when they're not asleep that they're not on it.
I'll tell you, research-wise, again, I think this really varies for every kid, right? And, again, if this is how they're socializing, that's what teens do, right? They need to socialize. So, you wouldn't want to take that away.
Yes,
but there's limits, right? Which is you can't be doing, obviously a simple example is you can't do that and just not do your homework, right? You got to get your homework done. So, at least for older kids, I think, you have to include them in this conversation, which is, we want you to be a healthy adult. We want you to be able to use and enjoy screens and phones and video games, but, you got to develop the skills to sort of show that you can do this responsibly. I think one of the big fears is just doing it too much, right? It's not so much that doing it is bad. It's that you don't want to do it and not do anything else, not go outside for physical activity, not make eye contact with your parents, right? You want them to still be human beings. And again, I've been at some seminars recently about this, and the answer is there's no really one answer, right? It's you've got to sit down. But one of the big messages I've taken away is that they have to be part of this, and sort of they have to, not necessarily agree to the plan, but they need to have a say in the plan, right? Again, I don't have a teenager yet, so this is in my future. I would start with things like, well, what's the most important to you? If you had limited time, is it more important to you to spend time texting on your phone, or is it more important to you to play this video game that you really enjoy, or to, watch this movie or whatever? And kind of go from there and sort of try to think about, okay, so how can we make that happen without it becoming a problem?
Right.
Again, there's no easy answers. It's more of a, I think having a conversation is what matters.
Sure. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. I'd be happy to answer any other questions. I also want to mention one more thing before we run out of time, which is if anybody, has been listening and is interested in actually helping us to find out about these things, my lab and other labs are always looking for research participants. If you'll go to the next slide, Mr. Cahill. If anybody, if you have some time, if you have a child, in my lab right now, we're looking for children ages 4 to 10. We do research. A lot of it is actually about technology and things like what do kids think about the internet and what it can teach you, or voice assistants like Alexa or Siri and what they think that those things can do. A lot of this research is actually done by my students at U of L, so you'd be helping out some U of L students. If this is something that sounds interesting to you, we also offer rewards. So right now we do all of our research online on Zoom, and kids get a $5 Amazon gift card for being in a study, and being in a study just means answering some questions. There's not, it's not like, it's almost like a game sometimes, like we'll show them some things and say, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about this? If you're interested, I hope you'll go to our website. It's LouisvilleKidsStudies.org. There's a place there for parents, and you can sign up. We also, hopefully one day, will be doing research in person at U of L again too. And by signing up, you're not agreeing to doing anything. We'll send you more information, and you can decide if you want to do it or not. You're never under any obligation to do it. But we're always looking for families who are interested in helping us out. That's how this kind of research gets done.
I think one time, Dr. Danovich, the kids lab was somewhere at like a flea off market or something.
Oh yeah, probably you've seen my students out there back when we could go out. We go to a lot of community events at the library and things like that.
Yeah, and my son participated. He thought he was just playing a game. So
yeah, the kids have a lot of fun. I'll tell you. Our research, it doesn't feel like a test or something. It feels like just talking to someone who's really interested in hearing what you have to say.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, again, if anybody's interested, you're also just welcome to contact me if you have any questions or anything like that.
Thank you, Ms. Burton. Families, Ms. Burton has put in the chat a form that if you fill that out, we're going to give away a free Chancey mask for just participating. So please fill that out if you attended. And yes, again, Dr. Danovich, thank you very much. This was very informative to me. I mean, I didn't think about those principles, and that's going to make me look at what my 3-year-old watches, what my 5-year-old watches, and kind of like what Miss Ivory said, my 7-year-old is just starting to kind of run away with video games, and how do I make that more meaningful, or just put those parameters in place.
I'm so glad to hear that. Again, that was my goal, just to give families tools. I think that's really important.
No,
and Kayla, I will tell you, my first tool was they couldn't play it during the week. During the week, there was no video games. And so they thought they were the only people on the planet that could only play on weekends. And it may have been true, and I didn't care. But ever since the pandemic, it's the only thing they have to socialize.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I'm in the same boat. We've had to let some of our, screen time limits be a little relaxed at our house because of the pandemic. And again, I think, I don't think people should be too hard on themselves or anything. I think, this is an unusual time. And if the only way for my kid to socialize is to play Minecraft, then that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Mhm.
But, so I always tell parents, be kind to yourselves. This is hard.
I like Dr. Danvers how you said, let them be part of it. My son's kind of young, and I feel like I probably use it more as leverage though over him. If he's had a bad day at school, he doesn't have access to it. He has a Switch, and that's what he likes to play with. So I was actually kind of glad to be able to say, yeah, you're going to school, and I want to see that daily report, because
Yeah.
if it's not where it needs to be, you won't get what you want. Is that?
And I think that's fine. I mean, screen time is a reward, right? At our house, we use it that way too. It can be, it's very motivating for kids. And if you think about all the different ways, other families might reward a kid with a cookie or something, right? Like it's the same thing. And like I said, it doesn't always have to be educational. Maybe the reward is, you cleaned your room and you can play this, otherwise kind of dumb game, but that the kid really likes, right?
Yeah. And that's the other thing I did, Cahill, the first part of the pandemic, like last spring, they had to complete 3 things. They had to do chores around the house, they had to exercise for a certain amount of time, and then they had to make sure all their homework and stuff was complete before they could play video games. And it's all gone out the door. It's bad times at the Ivory House.
Yeah, and sometimes you just need a screen. Like I remember when we just moved to Louisville and we had like a 2-hour meeting with signing a mortgage or whatever. And you know what? We just handed the kid an iPad and said, go to town, right? Like sometimes screens can be really helpful. I wouldn't do that every day, but it's okay sometimes to just, like I said, it's like eating candy, right? Like sometimes, it's Christmas and you're going to eat a whole lot of junk food and candy, right? And it's all right. And the next day you kind of get back to normal.
And that's a good point. So Ms. Burton, you and I need to come up with our rules before our kids go back to school after spring break.
Absolutely. Yes.
Let me know what you come up with. You're probably a better parent. Let's work on that.
It's cool.
Yeah. I was going to say, spring is a time for new things, so we can start new with some old things. Well,
yeah, and I think, this is always changing. Like I said, my son went back to school this week, and we've already had to change our screen time policy because it's a school day and we're not going to do as much as we do on, the days when he's at home longer.
Yeah.
You're welcome. I'm really glad to hear that people found it helpful.
Well, we've recorded this and we'll share this out also, Dr. Danovich, and we'll plan on sending home that flyer with our student body as well.
Great. Fantastic. And, I'm happy to do this presentation for other schools. You're one of the first schools that has asked. So, spread the word. I'm happy to, or for other sort of organizations too.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to Mr. Cahill for setting this up. He's kind of set up our speaker series, at least through the, U of L presenters. And so shout out to him. And thank you all so much for partnering with us.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back next year too.
Yeah, and thank you parents for showing up, because hopefully you spread the word and share with your peers and other parents just how beneficial this is, so that we are all helping our students and making sure we make great and safe choices for them with their technology and their screen time.
And families, if you're here today, we have one more speaker presentation coming up next month. It's with a colleague of Dr. Danovich. She works at U of L as well, and she's going to speak to us about emotional and developmental, kind of how kids develop.
She's wonderful. I think you'll really enjoy that too. She's really great.
Well, thank you again. And families, don't forget to fill out that form so you can get a free mask. It's a Chancey mask. It's really sharp. It says Chancey on it, and it's a real nice cloth mask. We'll have to send you one, Dr. Danovich.
For sure.
All right. Well, families, thank you so much. And I won't keep anybody else. It's getting to be a little bit later in the evening. So thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Have a good night.
Thanks so much.
Yes.
Thanks, parents and families. Thank you, Dr. Danovich.
Thank you, Miss Ivory. Thanks, Miss Burton.
Thanks, Mr. Cahill.
See y'all tomorrow.
Yes, thank you.
Tomorrow?
Maybe.
Yes.
Hey, be careful.
I will. I'm going to rest.
Yeah.
Hey, Cahill, can you stop recording?
Yeah. Maybe. We can edit it, right?
Nope, I don't know how. Just stop.